York's classic rock, Q1043.
I want to introduce you to Chris Bullard. He's the executive director of Sound Mind Music, a national nonprofit focused on ending the stigma around mental health through the power of music. And speaking of the power of music, the reason Chris is here is that we are coming up on the 4th annual Music Festival for Mental Health at Central Park, coming up on the 21st. So first of all, Chris, welcome. And this couldn't come at a better time. I think so many of us were absolutely shocked and horrified and paralyzed by the news that Naomi Judd took her own life one day before she and her daughter Winona were to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. And of course, Winona and Ashley, her daughters, were there to accept that honor. But, you know, here was someone who was so well known. Of course, she had so many traumas in her life, but here was a woman who about 6 years ago, Chris, told, I think, Good Morning America, that she would come off tour, go home, and basically sit on her couch for 2 weeks and not even tend to her own personal hygiene. She was that paralyzed with depression.
Yeah, it's really sad, and sadly, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of musicians, a lot of the music and just entertainment community struggle with. And I think one of the things that hopefully we're moving towards as a society is taking care of one another's mental health and respecting when people need that time and space. And sadly, moments like this, and over the last few years, there's been a number of people who have taken their own life as a result of mental health related issues. And it's a sober reminder that we need to take care of not only our own mental health, but of each other as a community, and just keep that as top of mind as our physical health.
Tell us about the concert coming up, and then we'll talk about your own story, because you have your own personal story.
Yeah, well, starting with the concert, I mean, we could not be more excited. It's just around the corner on May 21st. So really the goal of this, it's a music festival for mental health to bring together musicians and a coalition of leading mental health organizations and the city of New York to really build community around mental health. We've been through this pandemic over the last couple years, and obviously that's taking its physical toll, but there's a huge mental toll along with that. 1 in 4 youth have contemplated suicide, the CDC found. And so we really want to use this moment to bring the community together. We're having amazing artists like Cold War Kids and Big Boy and American Authors and a number of others perform, talk about their own experiences around mental health, really with the goal of destigmatizing, reaching out for support, and then also elevating all the resources where people can seek support. So we're partnered with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is the largest grassroots organization for mental health in the country. They provide free support services with their affiliate here in New York City and all throughout the country. And so we're also raising funding in the event for that. So folks can come out, enjoy the show. It's going to be a beautiful day in the park, amazing music sets by these artists, but then also learn about how to take care about their own mental health. And if someone they love is in need of support, they can get them support as well.
It's free?
It's a $40 ticket. And the reason we're doing that, like I said, every bit of proceeds is going to support the National Alliance on Mental Illness and their free support programs.
How do they get tickets?
So you can go to our site, which is soundmindlive.org. And you can find tickets there. There's also ways to take action around mental health advocacy, some local legislation, and with a chance to win prizes from artists as well.
Let's talk about your own story, Chris, because I suppose your own personal struggle has really defined your life and your career moving forward after dealing with yourself being stigmatized with your own personal struggles.
Yeah, thanks. It definitely has. So my path. I mean, out of college, I was a touring musician for a couple years in the folk world. And in my mid 20s, I was going through a huge transition point, moving away from music towards the next phase of my life. And I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Really that journey was a lot of things were going on in my life in terms of making sense out of a transition phase, which often is kind of a catalyst for a lot of mental health issues. And when I received the diagnosis, there was a lack of acceptance and a lack of understanding where to go for support. And I grew up in a family that was relatively open on these issues, but it still felt like something I could maybe only tell my closest friends, and I had to hide from work. I had to hide from everything else. And unfortunately, that made my recovery journey a lot longer. And so it wasn't until I moved to New York City, I was from LA originally, I started a music support program for others who were going through a similar journey, with bipolar disorder, but also with depression, anxiety, OCD, and just using music as a way to bring people together around mental health. And around that time, this music industry report came out that 73% of musicians live with symptoms of mental illness. And it was really this catalyst to really do something bigger, where music and musicians could be advocates for the cause. Much in this, one of the artists I had performed with previously was Willie Nelson, who you might know runs Farm Aid every year, supporting family farmers through music. And so really the initial goal with Sound Mind was to build a platform like that for musicians to speak out about mental health so others could seek support, and hopefully, really kind of circumvent that longer journey that it took for me, and unfortunately so many others who don't know how to seek support or don't feel comfortable reaching out.
At what point did you realize that you might be having mental issues?
I think the signs were sort of there for a while. In college, there was definitely an experience where I was briefly felt a little detached from reality, I'll say. So with bipolar disorder, I'm bipolar 1, there can be states of depression and states of mania, which is like a heightened mood, racing thoughts, and things like that. And I remember when I was diagnosed that time, there was a period where I was at my girlfriend at the time's place, and I just woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I have to go to New York or I'm going to die. And I had this urge to go walk probably like 100 miles to my parents' place. And, things that were just very alarming, that made sense in my own mind, and dots were connecting that were frightening to other people. And so, the procedure was I ended up in a psych ward for a little bit, which is a very scary time. Unfortunately, our mental health system is not what it should be. And I think, we need to move towards treating people with a lot more compassion. But, that journey really took me towards understanding what it's like to have a diagnosis, and how important it is, like when you have those early warning signs, to tell other people around you. If someone hadn't been around me, if my family and friends hadn't been there, if they hadn't been compassionate and supportive, I could have easily gotten lost in the system, sadly, like a lot of people do who don't have that support, that family or friend support system around them.
I'm speaking with Chris Bullard. He's the executive director of Sound Mind Live, a national nonprofit focused on ending the stigma around mental health through the power of music, and the upcoming 4th annual music festival for mental health that'll be taking place in Central Park on May 21st. So we've been talking about Chris's own struggle with bipolar disorder. I had a personal, I know personally from the psych wards, from a loved one who was put in a psych ward, and it felt like prison to me. It felt like an absolute prison. Before visiting this loved one, I had to lock up my belongings. I felt like I was visiting a prison, a jail.
Yeah,
There's something radically wrong there.
Yeah, it really is historically been the mentality to kind of separate folks who are experiencing these issues from society, as opposed to kind of leading with understanding and compassion. And the view, sadly, is too often that people who are experiencing these things are going to be harmful to others. It's actually, statistically, they've done research that people experiencing a mental health crisis are more likely to be harmed than to harm others. And so, whether it's in a psych ward or in prison wards, where a lot of the mentally ill end up, um, it's really something that we need to take a closer look at as a society. And so, actually, part of this event, the nation's releasing a new 3-digit number in July, kind of the 911
Yes.
of mental health.
Right, right.
Yeah, so this 988 number that's coming down the line, it's just a small step. There's a lot of work that's going to have to be done to rebuild our crisis response infrastructure around mental health. But just having that number is at least a first step of kind of reframing how we're thinking about mental health crisis response, that it's not just a police response, that there's a triage that can happen depending on how severe this is. How are we getting people the right support structures? So it's great that we as a society are starting to move in that direction more and more.
The 988, will that be available in every state, or is it up to each individual state whether to join that system?
So it is a federal mandate, but in terms of what that looks like, it's going to be up to each state,
Mm.
and people advocating their local legislators to improve the crisis response system. When it flips over, it's really going to look like the current uh, national suicide prevention line is what that response is going to look like. But what we really want and what we're trying to advocate for is for people to take action now. It's a great moment as this switches over, where wherever you're from, and I think New York is a great place to start, to really rebuild what we've done from a crisis infrastructure standpoint. Have people in the system answering these calls who have been through these issues themselves, people coming out to respond, not just police, but also trained mental health professionals when people are in crisis.
But there, Chris, we have another issue, and that is there aren't enough therapists. The need is greater than the community serving people. I mean, and it's true across the board. The need exploded during the pandemic, and maybe because we are freer to talk about this, that has opened people up to getting help, but there aren't enough therapists.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's almost a good problem to have. I think the fact that there's such a demand is part of just people, it's being normalized. Talk about my therapist with my friends all the time. I see a lot of people doing that more than they used to. But you're so right, there's such a need. Hope more people go into this. I know they're going to be passing a bill that's going to add more funding to support therapist training programs and peer support training programs. So it's a great field that is growing, and we need more people in it. Absolutely. Especially those who have loved ones who have gone through something,
or if you have, because who would have a greater understanding than someone who has been there, right?
Exactly. And that's so important, whatever field you work in, just having someone who understands your experience on some level is so helpful. Just saying, hey, I've been there. I know what you're going through, and you're going to get to the other end, and I can help you get there.
Well, I thank you, Chris Bullard. Again, we want to get you to the 4th Annual Music Festival for Mental Health in Central Park, May 21st. Again, how can people buy their $40 tickets?
Absolutely. Go to soundmindlive.org. You can get tickets there. And again, all the proceeds are going to support the mental health programs of the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
And the more, again, that we talk about this, the better it is, the less of a stigma it becomes. Being sick should not be a stigma. I wasn't stigmatized when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Nobody should be stigmatized because you're having issues. And coming up next, Well, something you probably don't think about. I mean, we have all these scammers out there, but do you realize that people can actually hack into your medical insurance and car insurance and rip you off? We'll be talking about how you can protect yourself next. Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.